From the Free Press, live in DC and presented by Uber and X, this is Honestly, and I'm Bari Weiss. Being Republican House Speaker is a little bit like marrying Henry VIII. At some point, your head will be chopped off. But for now, Mike Johnson looks physically intact and also is in a position of incredible power. 2 weeks ago, Johnson was reelected Speaker of the House on the first ballot, which is saying something. Despite having only the narrowest of House majorities, he was able to unite the various factions of the warring Republican Party. The moderates, the Freedom Caucus, the Raw Milk Caucus, the Libertarians, the Hawks, the Doves, and whatever we call Lauren Boebert. It was a tough thing to pull off, and it would only have taken a couple no votes to send him to that Republican Valhalla where John Boehner chain smokes and chugs Merlot, Paul Ryan does his push-ups, and Kevin McCarthy throws darts at a photo of Matt Gaetz. Now, Donald Trump will become President of the United States very shortly, and Mike Johnson, you, will have the thankless task, arguably, of shepherding his agenda through Congress. And because the Republicans control the House by only 4 seats, you're going to have to get close, I think, to some moderate Democrats, particularly those with constituents looking for a tax cut. So, Speaker Johnson, officially, thanks for joining me on Honestly, and thanks for making the time on this busy weekend.
Thanks, Bari. It's a great delight. That's a very unique introduction. I haven't had one like that in a while.
Thank you so much. You like the visual of Paul Ryan doing the P90X or whatever it's called?
It's very accurate, yes.
First simple question. Why'd you want this job?
Great question. This might sound hokey to you, but I feel called to it. It's not an easy job. I mean, Newt Gingrich, who was a predecessor, of course, the most famous speaker still in my mind of the modern era, wrote an op-ed a few months back and said, poor Johnson has the most challenging speakership since the Civil War, and he noted all the reasons for that. It's a challenging time, but it's also a time of great opportunity for the nation. And we feel the weight of that, not in a burdensome way, but we understand that we're at a precipice as a nation. This election cycle was a big turning point, I think. I think we have an opportunity to fix things, to get back to common sense, and I'm excited by that. So there are great challenges, great opportunity at the same time, but I'm convinced we're going to be able to deliver on this, and we're going to do well for the country, so that's why we're here.
Since your predecessor, John Boehner, was pushed out of the speakership in 2015, then we had Paul Ryan, then we had Kevin McCarthy. It's a lot of drama and a lot of chaos. You look at the other side of the aisle, and Nancy Pelosi was able to run things with an iron fist. What is it about Republicans that make them so ungovernable or hard to harness?
You know, that's a really good question. I was asked that question a lot of times over the last year. We had a big election cycle, and so every day that we were not in session, almost literally, I was on the road. So I did over 350 campaign events, 250 cities, 40 states, logged enough miles to circle the globe 5.5 times, campaigning to keep the majority. And we did by a narrow margin, but it was a success. But no matter where I was, coast to coast, this is a common question. How come the Democrats stick together and Republicans don't? And here's my answer, and I think it will make sense to you. Democrats really are consistent in their philosophy. They think very much and operate very much like a union. They're very collectivist, sort of in their worldview and their ideology. They move together as a pack. It almost is kind of they're all sort of social animals. It's socialism. It's in some real respect. Whereas on the other side of the aisle, the Republicans are by nature more independent, rugged individualists and deeply rooted in our philosophy, and you can't tell me what to do and all that stuff. And that's great. I mean, there's great blessing to that. I'm one of those people as well, until you have a 1-vote margin, and then you need everybody to move together. And so that is the challenge every day. I mean, the modern speakership has evolved to where the margins are so small, and they're going to be for the foreseeable future, no matter who has the majority. You can't spare hardly any votes, or sometimes no votes. And so you have to operate sort of like a mental health counselor. I mean, no kidding. I spend the large share of my day sitting down with members, working through their issues, helping them come to consensus. And so we have to bury our personal preferences sometimes because we're in a deliberative body. That's the nature of the beast. But I'll never ask anybody to compromise their core principles. And that's the fine line where you've got to sort of navigate. Come with me. You're not going to get all that. None of us are. But you got to be part of the team. And that's a great challenge some days.
So as someone that's trying to manage a team of disagreeable misfits myself, what advice do you have for me?
Yeah. Well, seriously, I was asked this on a podcast several days ago. How do you do it? this is such a great challenge. I mean, how do you just not pull your hair out? How do you maintain composure?
Like, look at your hair. It's
Yeah,
excellent.
right. Well, it's going gray quickly. I'm aging prematurely in this job. This is really genuinely how I sort of operate. My worldview is that you have to actually have love for your colleagues. You know, love everybody. This is a biblical admonition. I'm one of those guys. And if you really take hold of what that means, it allows you to have a lot of tolerance for people, a lot of empathy, sympathy, whatever is occasioned of the day. And you can see past their frustrations and peccadillos. And even when they come after you personally, you can forgive it and not keep a record of wrongs. These are all biblical admonitions. If you follow that, it's a very liberating way to live. And because I genuinely love all my colleagues, I understand what they bring to the table. I appreciate their skill sets, their life experiences, all these things. And I'm trying to leverage that because I want them to be of their highest and best use for the cause and the country and our caucus, our conference. But also, they've got to be able to work cohesively with the team. It's easier with some than others, but that's the job.
Well, let's talk about some of the others that you're referring to there. You've sort of obliquely referred to some of the show ponies in your party. And it's no secret that certain people, like I'm thinking of Chip Roy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Thomas Massey, they are the challenging, let's just say the challenging wing of the party. How do you manage that group? I don't even know how they would identify themselves at this point, but they have brought down other speakers before you, they and similar figures. How do you manage them? And frankly, and if there's a way to characterize that group, what do they want?
Well, how do I manage? I don't manage them. I work with them as a family. We're kind of like a big family, and families can be messy sometimes.
And dysfunctional.
Right? And dysfunctional sometimes. But at the end of the day, everybody has the same objective. We're trying to do best for the country. Those you named are all friends. I love and value them all, even when we disagree. And we can disagree in an agreeable manner. And that's what allows you to navigate through it. So I understand where they're coming from. Chip Roy, for example, is a very good friend of mine. Like, we disagree on tactics, but not necessarily on philosophy or principle. And so that tactics is where in the Deep South we say intense fellowship. That's what we have a lot of intense fellowship. And Chip is he gets very animated. He's very passionate about his principles, which I actually love and value about him. So we're not at odds personally. I'm not at odds personally with anybody. And my job at the end of the day is to take Chip and Thomas on this side and my colleagues who are elected in Kamala Harris districts, right, from New York and New Jersey and California and other places, and get them to the point where we can find consensus with the whole group. And it takes a lot of patience, a lot of time, but we can get everybody there, and we will.
You were elected speaker despite the obstinance of some in the more right-wing wing of your caucus, yet you got Donald Trump's support. Why do you think he supported you?
We have a great relationship. It's been forged over and developed over about 8 years. We came to Washington at the same time. I was a freshman in Congress in 2017 when he was introduced to Washington. We've had a lot of experiences along the way. One day I'll write a 3-volume set about all of this. It's been developed over a long time. I was one of his impeachment defense attorneys, on the House side, helped with all that. We had disagreements along the way when he was president over a couple of pieces of legislation and things, but even when we disagreed, he evaluated early on. He's a great judge of character, and he understood that what I was telling him was in good faith. I was telling him what I genuinely believed was for his best interest and thus the country's, and I was resolute enough that I didn't just fold. I told him what I thought he needed to know. He appreciates that, and so we've become very close over the last, certainly in recent years, and during the campaign over the last year, we talked all the time. I mean, now we talk almost constantly, and I think that's a really important thing for the country. It's very important for the President of the United States and the Speaker of the House, certainly of the same party, to have a close working relationship and one of trust, and I think that's what this is based upon. And he's had my back, and I've had his, and I'm humbled and honored to have had his endorsement and support. It's a great working relationship. I think it's really important for the country. It's different in many ways, and the relationship he had, for example, with Paul Ryan, who was the Speaker in 2017, they really didn't know one another, and so they were sort of being introduced at a very important time for the country. No one thought we would have unified government in 2017, so he surprised everyone, including the leadership in the House and Senate. And so they had to forge that relationship through fire, through the process. We don't have that hurdle right now, and he and I think very much the same. We're going to work the same way to deliver that America First agenda, and that's what the country needs.
You told The New Yorker that you're the first genuinely pro-Trump Republican congressional leader. What does that say about Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell?
Well, they said that about me. I didn't say it about myself. That's how it was characterized.
Okay.
I wouldn't discount anybody's previous relationship. McCarthy was very close to the president. But all I know is that the relationship I have with him right now, we're very much aligned on the principle and the policy, and I think it's going to be very important for us to deliver. I mean, he got a big mandate in this election. Let's not forget, 77 million votes. The House Republicans got 74.7 million. That's the highest vote total, popular vote we've ever had for House Republicans. And some would say, well, you rode the president's coattails. I think it was a combination of things. Certainly, he delivered for the party. He helped deliver for us. We had a demographic shift in this election cycle. We have a record number of Hispanic and Latino voters and Black and African American voters, Jewish voters, union workers, all that. He almost did a reset in a way, not unlike what Reagan did in the early 80s. And now we're all presented with this great opportunity to embrace the new folks who have come into the party and to demonstrate for them that it is our policies that actually lead to human flourishing. Our policies are what's best. It's common sense. It's what's best for individuals and families and communities and the states and the nation itself. And so I'm so excited by that prospect. The president is as well, and he's going to restore common sense, and I think that's the continuing theme that you'll see in our agenda.
Those new voters that you referenced, and people have paid a lot of attention, especially to the minority vote and minority men that are going for Trump. Reaction against Biden and I don't even know how to characterize it, the dysfunction of a lot of the past 4 years, or genuine enthusiasm for Trump?
I think it's both. I think President Trump is a symbol to so many people, especially some of these demographics of just unabashed strength again. I mean, there's a lot of men who have felt like the Democratic Party went so crazy woke progressive. I mean, you've written and thought a lot about this. That it's as if the pendulum was swung so far to the left so fast and aggressively that it went too far and it clicked. And it's almost like in my mind, it's sort of coming back. And so President Trump represents the force that's pushing it back in so many ways to so many people. Because what is he? He's brash by some people's description, but by others, that's a strong leader. That's a strong man. He's unafraid to say what he thinks. And it can be a blessing and a curse, because sometimes he says things that rub people the wrong way, but he's not afraid to do it. And I think that resonates with a lot of men, some of these demographics. I think they want to see that again. They want to see us restore peace through strength, for example, in foreign policy. And the Biden administration did exactly the opposite. They appeased our enemies. I mean, look at Israel, the thing with Israel. I mean, they were appeasing Iran. They refused to confront Iran. And so what that did was it empowered them, Iran and its proxies like Hamas, whereas they were encumbering Israel at the same time. They had it exactly inverted, and people see that in so many examples in so many policy arenas, and they said enough is enough. And so President Trump comes back with his style and bravado, and he represents a strong America again in many ways, and the country needs that desperately.
There's been a lot of talk about, I want to get to foreign policy in a minute, because you could argue that there's a different kind of appeasement going on with this deal and the role of Qatar in this deal, and the ways in which Qatar has frankly bought a lot of people and influence in DC. I want to talk about that in a second. Just sticking on domestic policy for a moment, this vibe shift, right? Mark Zuckerberg going on Joe Rogan, getting rid of tampons in the men's bathrooms at Facebook, getting rid of DEI, unraveling it. Genuine change of heart or opportunism that you're seeing from a lot of these tech people?
Well, I can't judge these men's hearts, but I would tell you that they've done a 180 real quick. I mean, look, obviously, this is about profitability. They run companies, right? So they've got to make sure that they're on steady footing with the new administration. But there were some incredible abuses in those spaces over the last 4 years. I came from the Judiciary Committee before I was elected Speaker, and we were having hearings, and we were collecting the data of all the abuses just in the tech space on the social media platforms. There was a court opinion that came out from my state, the Western District of Louisiana Federal Court, July 4th, I think, of 2022. And the judge detailed all this. It's about a 140-page court opinion, a summary judgment hearing at the time, and he documented all the abuses from the tech platforms, where Zuckerberg's talked about this in recent days. The Biden administration officials were cursing at him on the phone. He was talking about vaccine mandates, for example. Any negative information about side effects from vaccines was scrubbed from the internet. The court looked at all this. They realized that Elvis Chan in the FBI office in Silicon Valley was meeting regularly with the big tech platform execs and giving them pages of people to censor and silence and viewpoints. It's a dangerous thing. The judge said it was dystopian, Orwellian. He said it was the greatest abridgment of free speech since the First Amendment was drafted. I mean, that's big language for a court, but they just said how crazy this was. So there's a lot of things.
So do you think that someone like Mark Zuckerberg, I know you can't see into his heart, but do you think the people that, maybe you can, do you think that those people were sort of privately red-pilled and now feel like they have the cover to come out and be public about it?
Well, maybe. I mean, clearly Elon was a big, sort of, broke the gates open in a way. But I've been out in Silicon Valley. I had fundraisers in San Francisco over the last cycle. I never thought that would ever happen. And all the big tech executives were around the table saying, we're in. You know why?
Who was around the table?
I don't know if I should. I was at David Sachs' house, I'll tell you that. He's now out, so we can say that. There was a bunch of people, and it would surprise you, but some who have been kind of in conservative circles for, Lonsdale, for example, and Joe Lonsdale, and Mark Andreessen came and spoke at a big event I had at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with all the biggest donors in the party, and he held a course, a master course on blockchain and crypto and AI and why, if you love freedom, you better be for blockchain. And they all went out, cheering. It was great, because people.
But this is before he came out publicly.
Yeah, this probably didn't help with that. It probably got him out sooner. But here's what I think the dynamic was. It wasn't just red pill. They woke up and realized, wait a minute. The Democratic Party is trying to smother innovation in our industries. They're trying to regulate us almost out of existence. Their tax policies are crazy. Our profitability is suffering. Oh, and here's this other group over here, and they're for the free market, and they want us to innovate, and they believe in entrepreneurship and risk-taking and job creation. And I think I'm with them.
But then they also believe in economic protectionism and tariffs at the same time.
Well,
right?
Who's they?
Okay, well, let's just get, to me, the core tension right now in the GOP is, and it's not saying anything unique, it's about its identity. What is it? Right? Is it populist, or is it free market? Is it about the collective, a kind of Orrin Cassian vision, or is it about, total freedom for the individual? Is it more libertarian or not? Right? And obviously this has been typified or, personified in the person of Steve Bannon and Elon Musk, which kind of represent these two new wings of the party.
Yep.
Do you see it that way? And like, how do you maintain a big tent big enough to have genuinely conflicting visions of what the modern Republican Party ought to be about?
I think a lot about this. In fact, for about 2 years, I don't have any free time at all, but I'm dabbling and trying to finish my first book, and my wife is like, finish it or you're done.
Novel or?
No, it's on this subject. I wish I had time for fiction. This is, it's called The 7 Core Principles of American Conservatism, and it's got several subtitles.
Let's work on the title. Let's work on the title.
I know.
I can help you with that.
I know. I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff, but I've been thinking about this a long time, because I have always considered myself a Reagan Republican. I came up in the 80s, and I believed in everything he stood for. And as I got old, I was a constitutional law attorney. I really dug in on this stuff. I started studying the history of the conservative movement. And I'll tell you a quick story, because it'll illustrate what I'm talking about. When I was a sophomore in Congress, my second term, I got elected chair of the Republican Study Committee, largest caucus of conservatives in Congress. Actually, it's the largest caucus at the time. We had 158 House Republicans. I should not have been elected to that. I didn't have the seniority, but it was really more about, skill set, whatever. So I became the head of that party. And I remember this is 2019. We're going through a sea change as a party. We're midway through the Trump administration. These debates and the things you just articulated are percolating up, and everybody's kind of talking about it in their own way. And it felt like we were, in some ways, almost losing our identity as a party. And so what I tried to do is wrangle all that back together, harness the energy, and not have us stray too far from our founding principles as a party. So I tried to come up with a summary. I was traveling around the country doing campaign events, and I was talking to my colleagues, and it occurred to me that many people who identified as conservatives were not able to articulate in a concise manner what that meant. So I stood in front of all the RSC members after having been elected chair, and I said, y'all, we're kind of at an inflection point. What does it mean to be an American conservative? And I posited to them this notion. I said, listen, if I asked each of you, let's say you're in an elevator downtown here in Washington, later this afternoon, And you get on an elevator and you have a young progressive there, and you have just a couple of maybe 3 minutes to talk with this person about their philosophy, and they tee you up for it. Why? Because they're wearing a t-shirt that says Proud Progressive. Okay, so you're in the elevator. How do you summarize for them what we believe? What do you believe? Why is it better for them? Why
well,
is
I know how
ideal?
to do that if we're talking about Reagan-era conservatism.
Well, okay.
Free people, free markets.
Well, sort of, but it's more detailed than that. I boiled it down to what I call the 7 core principles, and it's individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. Under each of those things are subcategories, but those are sort of the fixed points on the horizon. Those are the things that define us. I told my colleagues, I said, if you had to condense all conservative thought, a library full of volumes of from Edmund Burke until today, I think that list pretty well crystallizes it.
Okay, but square that for me with Trump saying the most beautiful word in the English language is tariff.
Tariff. Yeah, he told me that a couple of days ago.
So let's just hear more of this Trump personation that you just...
No, I get in a lot of trouble for that. No, one big beautiful bill, that's what we're going to do. So,
Jesus!
No, don't make me do it.
More!
No.
You're better than Shane Gillis, come on.
Oh yeah, I need a backup plan. I got to
Come
do
on.
SNL.
Just talk to me about tariffs as Trump for
No.
30 seconds.
No. Okay, look, what we're
beautiful.
doing right now is a fusion. It's a new fusion, okay? we're taking Reagan, classic Reaganism.
And fusing it with
Populist.
nationalist populism.
Right.
That don't work.
Well, let's see if it works. What Trump did in 2015, 2016 is he recognized some blind spots in the party. So he started talking about things like the threat of China, right? It wasn't really big on the radar, not to the point it is now. He saw it first. Tariffs, trade policy, the American worker. And I think the party in some ways had lost focus of that. Now, Reagan did it so well because he brought all these people into the party in the early 80s, but we had mission drift in some way. So the populist aspect of this is a good sort of shot in the arm. I don't think we abandon who we are as a party. I don't think we ever can. I will be fighting for us not to abandon the core principles, but at the same time recognize, populism is defined different ways by different people, but at its essence, what I think we're getting at is what are the desires and needs of the people, the common sense needs that they have.
Well, let's choose maybe two obvious pivot, points of tension is maybe an elegant way to say it.
Yes.
One is foreign policy. There is an enormous range right now, much more so I would argue than even the Democratic Party, among Republicans about what you just defined as peace through strength.
Yep.
There are people who really put the emphasis on the strength part of that and understand that peace comes through, making your enemies fear you and being serious and following up with your threats.
Right.
There are many other people in your party who really emphasize the peace part of it and seem to sort of ignore how peace is guaranteed. Where do you fall in that debate?
I think I fall where Reagan did, but with this caveat. I have a lot of colleagues, they're defined, some of them are defined as isolationists, but they're not. They're anti-interventionalists, right? So there's a sliding scale here. They're not saying that it should be America only. But when they say America first, what they mean is we take care of our own house before we take care of the neighborhood. It's just really, again, a return to common sense. At the same time, we have the biggest, most powerful house in the neighborhood. And we have to maintain that perception because that's what keeps peace in the neighborhood. So you have to have an adequately funded and prepared defense. We've strayed away from that in the last few years. Pete Hegseth is one of the reason he's a nominee, unconventional as he is because he understands that we have to have the strongest military in the world. A strong America is good for everybody around the globe. One thing I've learned, Barry, over the last 15, 16 months since I've been speaker, the only international trip I had time to take as speaker, because I was a wartime speaker for the last, into the last Congress, is I went to Italy for the G7 speakers meeting, and I had to go because it's G7. And I met there with my counterparts, who are the leaders of the great, free parliaments around the world, and then others, the other countries who were invited. And all of them, I recognized, I've always understood the importance of America on the world stage. But it never resonated with me as it did when I walked into that room. Because when America walks, it's not me, it's who I represent in that setting. And you walk in and people go, it's almost like the Lion King, it's America. That's what we have to do.
And you are Mufasa.
I am not Mufasa in this metaphor. I'm more like the cub, I think. But anyway, but I represent the great power. And we have had that stature since World War II. Reagan used to say so eloquently, he said the leadership of the free world was placed upon the shoulders of America after World War II. And I think it was Pope Pius XII who articulated this so well. We have a responsibility. It does not mean that we need to be nation builders and interventionists and have boots on the ground.
But Speaker, even that notion of the free world, the idea that Ukraine is sort of at the front lines of the free world, the idea that the Israelis that are fighting terrorists in southern Lebanon and in Gaza are at the front line of the free world. There are people in your caucus who don't believe in that notion. They don't believe in the connectivity of those things, fundamentally.
Yes, but Israel, for example, because this is a live fire exercise. Right now, we were talking about this morning, I talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. He called me to give me an update, and I wanted to encourage him. You know, they're having a struggle right now, whether you just take out the threat of Hamas or whether they acquiesce and do this peace deal.
Hamas or Iran?
Well, maybe both. I mean, we have to see. His position right now, I'm not saying anything that's classified, this is public, but they believe they got to eradicate that threat, and they need America, sort of the big brother in this scenario, standing over their shoulder to ensure that they can. They really, Israel wants to do it, they will do it on their own. That's what the kind of activity we want to encourage, but they have to know that we will stand resolutely with them. See, Hamas had calculated that the American and Israeli relationship was being weakened because Biden and Blinken and the team were equivocating. We won't do that. We have a new sheriff in town. When the president stood at Mar-a-Lago a week ago and said, there'll be hell to pay if you don't get those hostages back, that's the kind of thing that we need. It does not mean we're sending American troops to go be boots on the ground in the conflict, but the presence, the perception, the power of America being projected in that way is critical, not only for our role to maintain our status as the last great superpower and keep our edge over China and other competitors, but because it sort of broadcasts peace around the globe. That understanding, you've seen all the world leaders making their pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago over the last couple of months since the election. You know, they understand the necessity of us being in this strong position and what that means for all of them and their own countries around the globe. That's a really important role that we cannot ever surrender because the consequences of it are too great.
Is this deal Trump's or Biden's?
Oh, it's Trump's. I mean, look, they wouldn't even be having the conversation. It wouldn't come to that inflection point without his making the open threat like that.
There are people that are resigning on the right from, you know, the Israeli Knesset, like Ben-Gvir and I think Shmutrik, because they feel like this is breaking the fundamental covenant. In other words, there's a core tension in this war. Bring all the hostages home and defeat Hamas forever. Those things were never reconcilable. And their argument is, you know, Yahya Sinwar, who was freed with the Gilad Shalit deal, then becomes the mastermind. Who are the terrorists that are going to be released now and commit the next October 7th? What do you make of that argument?
Israel is very concerned about that. The leadership is very concerned, and so are we. And the terms of that deal is something they've got to negotiate and be comfortable with. We should not be, you know, intervening in that. I don't think it's our place. But as I told the Prime Minister yesterday, I said, you know, the Speaker of the House stands with you. We will stand resolute with you, and I believe that is going to be President Trump's first, you know, admonition and his commitment when he comes in. He understands our role in the world, and he wouldn't be out using that strong language like there'll be hell to pay if he was not willing to back it up, and that's really important for us to project.
One more question on the deal. Help square for me the fact that Qatar is the country that shields the leaders of Hamas, one of whom just came out with a video saying, you know, victory, and by the way, there's going to be another October 7th. Why would we trust Qatar to do that? Why are we so comfortable with the relationship that many in DC seem to have with a country that actively harbors terrorists? Like, explain that to me.
I wish I could. I have the same concern and question, and we have to walk very circumspectly in these places. You see, you want to believe the best about these other countries in that region and that they're doing it in good faith and for the right reason, and restoring peace to that region should be good for it is good for everyone. They should recognize it. But as Ronald Reagan said, you know, trust but verify, or maybe.
But we don't even need to verify.
Well,
they're literally putting the leaders of Hamas on television.
Yeah, maybe we distrust and verify at the same time. I have real concern about it as you do, and I don't have the answer, but it's something we got to divine.
Okay, let's talk about Biden for a second.
Yeah.
You have said that he is the worst. I actually want to quote this, make sure I get it right. You have said that he is the worst president in the history of this country. Worse even than James Buchanan?
I didn't say that.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't say James Buchanan.
No, you didn't say James Buchanan. You said
okay.
Biden is the worst president in the history of the country.
All right.
With him about to leave office,
Yes.
Do you want to
Let me tell you-
revise that, or do you stand by it?
I do stand by it, and I say this without any personal animus at all. I mean, in some ways, I actually kind of feel sorry for Joe Biden. I mean, he's in the twilight years of his life. He is not, obviously, has not been in charge for some time, and I know this by personal observation, and now the whole world knows it, and it's been very, very concerning to me over the last, year and a half since I've had this
Can you
position.
tell us a story when you say personal observation? What kind
Well,
of
I
thing
mean,
did you see?
it's public now because the Wall Street Journal got it and put it on the front page. But January a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I had been asked. I became Speaker in October 2023, and there were all sorts of big national security concerns and everything going on. And I started requesting a meeting with the president because I'm kind of old school. I'm a constitutional law guy. The Speaker of the House should be able to talk to the president, especially in times of great national interest and calamity. But they wouldn't let me meet with him, and his staff kept giving me excuses. This went on for like 8 or 9 weeks. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have time. What are you talking about? I'm second in line of the presidency. He has time. I need to talk to him. We had, I can't say the classified parts, but we had some big national concerns at the time that I was losing sleep over. Finally, I just went to the Hill Press Corps and I said, the president is not being allowed to meet with the Speaker. There's a problem. So they started putting pressure on him. Long story short, they finally relented. They invited me to the White House. I show up and I realize it's actually an ambush because it's not just me and the president. It's also Kamala Harris, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem, the CIA director, everybody. And then, so I walked in the Oval and I know what this is. They're going to hotbox the Speaker on Ukraine funding. That's what it was. This is probably third week of January. We sit down, we're in the midst of it, and the whole conversation, and I'm going, we don't need to have this conversation. The president reaches over just like this. We're sitting right next to the fireplace in the Oval, and he grabs my arm and he says, the Speaker and I just need a couple minutes together. Would y'all just leave us alone? And I looked up on the faces of some of the staff standing around the wall, and they're like, oh, no, he did it. So he called it. He's the commander-in-chief. So everybody leaves, and he and I are standing awkwardly in the middle of the Oval Office, right over the rug by that coffee table. And I said, Mr. President, thanks for the moments. This is very important. I got some big national security things I need to talk to you about that I've heard, and I think you know, and what do we do? But first, real quickly, Mr. President, can I ask you a question? I cannot answer this from my constituents in Louisiana. Sir, why did you pause LNG exports to Europe? Like, I don't understand, liquefied natural gas is in great demand by our allies. Why would you do that? Because you understand, we just talked about Ukraine. You understand you're fueling Vladimir Putin's war machine because they got to get their gas from him, And he looks at me, stunned with this, and he said, I didn't do that. And I said, Mr. President, yes, you did. It was an executive order, 3 weeks ago. And he goes, no, I didn't do that. And he's arguing with me. I said, Mr. President, respectfully, could I go out here and ask your secretary to print it out? We'll read it together. You definitely did that. And he goes, oh, you talk about natural gas. Yes, sir. He said, no, you misunderstand. He said, what I did is I signed this thing we're gonna conduct a study on the effects of LNG. I said, no, you're not, sir. You paused it. I know. I have the export terminals in my state. I talked to those people this morning. This is doing massive damage to our economy, national security. It occurred to me, Barry, he was not lying to me. He genuinely did not know what he had signed. And I walked out of that meeting with fear and loathing because I thought, we're in serious trouble. Who is running the country? I don't know who put the paper in front of him, but he didn't know. All right, so
who's been the president for the past year and a half?
I wish I could tell you. I get asked this question
all the time. Because my wife thinks it's Dr. Jill, who's only referred to in our house as Dr. Jill.
She certainly had a lot of influence, but I think it is a group of people. Look, this is the way I have reasoned this. When he was on the stage and he had 15 or 16 different Democrats on the first debate, and they were trying to get the nomination, when he ran, they were dropped off one by one, and they settled on Joe because they thought he'd be the most electable because some of them were too far left. Well, each of them, I think, sat down with him as a condition of dropping out, and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie and the rest, and said, fine, but you're going to take my person to run this, and you're going to take this person, and here's my list of demands. And he just agreed to all of it because he wanted to be president so badly. So over the next 4 years, they made good on those commitments, and he brought in people, and he signed things, incongruous as they were, as dangerous as they were, counterproductive. He just fulfilled the commitments, and he had people around him doing it, and it led us into absolute chaos, and every metric of public policy is a disaster, and that's why I think that is not an uncharitable description. It is objective fact. I think when it's measured, his public opinion polls, the lowest ever, when it's measured, I think the results are going to be that he was the worst president, certainly in the modern era, maybe in the whole country, in the whole history of the country.
Just let's stay on this for one beat, the cover-up, okay, if we can call it that, of his mental capabilities. I was at a dinner with a lot of prominent Democratic donors, and there was I'm sure you've been at many dinners like this with Republicans, where someone says something and everyone just kind of repeats it and repeats and repeats, and everyone's in agreement and they're so happy. And the consensus that night was Joe Biden's amazing. Joe Biden is fully compos mentis. He can do anything. Incredible president, incredible strength. And one of them sits down after, and we're kind of having a private conversation. I'm like, level with me here. Like, what do you actually think? And the things that came out of this person's mouth to me in private were the exact opposite of the things they had just proclaimed in front of many of their friends at this dinner party. Like, I guess the phrase is preference falsification, right? The cascade begins when someone tells their private truth out loud and sort of dispels the public lie. How much of an effect do you think that had on the election? Like, the sense that people had that they were being lied to.
About everything. About everything. The economy's great. Bidenomics is awesome. Your family's doing great. I mean, wokeness is the new way of the future, and you should, all of it. Everything they did was just they were defying common sense. They were trying to defy gravity. They ignored the people's real sentiments. No one liked any of that stuff, and they got fed up with it. I mean, in layman's terms, that's what happened. That's what the election was about. It was a full repudiation of that nonsense, and that's what it was. And when President Trump says we're going to restore common sense, people stand up and cheer, because that's a low bar, but that's where we are. We've got to get back to just reason and thought and not groupthink. And they did that to their detriment. I think the Democratic Party, they're doing the autopsy now, and they recognize they went too far. They're in a real problem because they don't have a identified leader of the party. They don't have a real vision right now. They're going to have to do a whole cloth rewrite of their platform, and it gives us a great opportunity to demonstrate common sense, and that our principles, those core principles I articulated, and the things that fall under those subcategories, is what is going to lead us back. The things that made us the greatest nation in the history of the world are the things that will make us great again. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel here.
Do you think there's something so bleak about the phrase, make America great again?
Actually, it's a Reagan phrase. I mean, he said it.
I know, but the assumption is that it's not great.
Oh, that's nonsense. I'm an exceptionalism guy. I believe it is.
But if we have to make something great again, it means it's not great.
Well, look, there's no question that we've been tarnished. I mean, the shine has come off. We're not the shining city on a hill right now. We're divided. We've gone through a valley, a dark valley. But the beauty of America is, I think we are going to have a new morning in America, because we can always return to those principles. And we do need to return. We have strayed away and tried to become something that we're not. America is the greatest nation in the history of the world. It's not even subject to rational debate. Look, we're the strongest, the freest, the most powerful, most successful, most benevolent nation that's ever been. And there's a reason for that.
And I would add most progressive. I agree with that. But if you wind back the clock, 8 years ago, 2016, this very weekend, Donald Trump gets up and delivers one of the bleakest speeches I've ever heard an American political leader give, the American Carnage speech.
Yeah.
What do you think we're going to hear from him when he gets up on stage, whether it's indoors or outdoors?
Well, it'll be indoors now, thankfully, because I'm from Louisiana.
Are you freezing?
Oh, I was going to layer up. I mean, we had the heat warmers, and we don't need any of that now. I'm grateful.
I thought they were doing it for the gerontocracy. Like, the older senators literally cannot be outside in those temperatures.
No kidding. I just left my office. Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham were in my office, and we were talking about old senators who couldn't stand the cold. Did I just say that on camera? I'm sorry. No, it's going to be fine. But look, his tone.
But you remember that speech.
I do, and I think what he was trying to do, it was intended to be jarring.
It was definitely jarring.
Well, it was. He had to shake everybody out of the malaise. It's not some of the language, it wasn't a Reagan speech, right? But it took that.
He needs Peggy Noonan, let's be real.
Yeah. I love her. She was a great speechwriter, and she's still great. It was like pumping the heart back into action, right? Like, it was jarring, it got everybody's attention, and then it set us back on the course to do what we're doing now. And now his language is much more lofty and optimistic. He's talking about a new golden age in America, and that's not campaign rhetoric. We can actually do that because we know how. And if we have unified government, and if we can keep the Republicans rowing in the same direction, that's what we'll do. And it will be good for everybody, no matter their party or ideology.
I think one of the great paradoxes of American life right now, I'm sure you saw yesterday, there was another heavy booster rocket that SpaceX sent into space and got caught by these, I guess what you could only describe as chopstick arms. Like, we live in a country where that is possible.
Yeah.
And I know Blue Origin, the New Glenn, made its way. It was like an incredible week for space.
Yep.
And yet you look at California, and entire neighborhoods are being burned to the ground right now.
Yep.
There was not water in some of the hydrants or in one of the key reservoirs. Explain this to me.
Case in point.
But is that just government? Like, is that just
Yes.
the nature of bureaucracy
Yes.
versus private enterprise? Or is that just a really, really poor lawmakers in that particular state?
It's both. I mean, it's an illustration. Elon is the private sector, the free market, unleashed, a great entrepreneurial spirit and great creativity and everything that's allowed in the private sector, unencumbered by government regulation. Even though they are heavily regulated, we can remove some of that red tape and make it even better. That's the hope. That's why he's so deeply invested. But then here's government in California. I mean, it just illustration A. I mean, it's government on steroids, radical progressivism. I mean, they're doing everything that defies common sense, and there are real consequences to that. It was so phenomenal to me. The LA Times last week retracted their endorsement for Mayor Karen Bass and said, oh gee.
That guy's pivot makes Mark Zuckerberg look like a tortoise. Like,
Well,
I'm getting whiplash. Like, all of a
Right.
sudden, the LA Times, which is being run by his literally communist daughter,
Yes.
is now, he's all of a sudden like
Yeah.
Team Maha. It's the craziest
Well, I
thing
mean,
I've ever seen.
The recognition of, gosh, competence may actually matter in a mayor's race. Oh, wow, in a governor's race. And they're talking about recalling the mayor and the governor. You know, look, they need
But
to.
how do we get the heavy booster chopstick arms vibes into government? Like, anyone that's been to the DMV
working
wants to
on it.
kill themselves.
We're working on it. Elon and I were flying, it's going to sound like the opening of a bar joke, but flying back from the UFC fight at 3 a.m. back to Mar-a-Lago.
Wow. Eating McDonald's?
Yes, RFK was eating he really did eat it.
Oh,
and
that was
enjoyed it.
the famous picture?
Yeah, I was standing right
that
behind
his-
him.
I
Yeah.
feel like you guys forced him to do
No,
that.
no,
That was
it-
like some hazing
on
ritual.
his own volition. Enjoyed it. He
Really?
enjoyed it, yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Big Mac or?
Oh, the whole thing. Because when you're on Trump Force One, which is the finest plane in the world today, everybody's saying it's the finest plane. When you're on there, you don't like give an order. You are served, and you get I guess it's a quarter pounder with cheese or a Big Mac with cheese. You get fries and the nuggets and a big giant Diet Coke.
Wow.
It's fantastic.
Wow.
And, yeah, I know. And on the finest plane in the world. And so we're sitting there in this surreal moment. We had been at UFC, I'm hanging out ringside with, Kid Rock and Jelly Roll and all that. And I mean, it was so fun. But we were flying back, so it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. We did a round trip from Mar-a-Lago to the UFC deal.
Jesus.
We landed back in Palm Beach at like 4:25 a.m. or something. But anyway, it's the middle of the night. Everybody's up like it's the afternoon. It's so much fun. Anyway, I'm sitting in the plane talking to Elon about that question: how do we integrate all this great thing in government? And we're talking about Doge and the incredible potential and possibility that's there. And he's applying his like unique physics analytical mind to like government, and it's a totally new paradigm for him and for all of us. One of the challenges we have right now is to answer that question, to marry all these things together, to leverage the Doge insights, and he and Vivek and everybody who's working on that. And by the way, he's asked for resumes for people who want to work for this non-governmental agency that's going to inform a lot of what we do. As we're trying to downsize the size and scope of government, it's good to have fresh eyes on that and to have private sector individuals look at this like a business. That's one of the appeals of Donald Trump, why people voted for him. He thinks of government with the mind of a businessman instead of a politician. And that's great. That's what the country needs.
What's your impression of Elon Musk? And do you think that the bromance between these two alphas, these two arguably strongest men in the world, is destined for a blow up? And when do you think that's going to happen?
I love it. I have some epic selfies of the three of us like hanging out on the plane. I've really enjoyed getting to know Elon. He's a fascinating guy, and he's humble enough to know that while he's an expert in like things I can't even begin to fathom, he doesn't know a lot about government. It's just not his thing. He's never been into it. But he's one of the smartest guys on the planet, obviously, and he can learn it quickly. So we've been talking about that. I've been on the phone with him talking about the legislation and the components that go into it and why it's so important and all that. I've really enjoyed that relationship, and he's just a unique figure. I mean, he's brilliant, obviously. And he can do things that we couldn't have imagined, catching a rocket with chopsticks, as you said, and so much more that we're capable of that will help us in the defense space and everything else. And to have that integrated in some way in the new administration is part of the magic of it. And now how it works, it's a blank canvas on which we are painting now, and we're trying to figure out how all that works together. But you got two entrepreneurial spirits there at the top, those two, that are thinking about that in very creative ways. And we're going to try to pull it all together, and I think we can.
One of the early blow-ups between the Musketeers and the Bannonites was over this H-1B visa issue, real high-skilled immigration. Where did you fall on that debate?
I came off the Judiciary Committee where immigration was in our jurisdiction, and we wrestled over that because they're both right. They're both right in certain respects. It's one of the hardest things. Comprehensive immigration reform is so complicated, and we spent my sophomore term in Congress. We spent almost a year and a half trying to forge a consensus on how to fix the mess because we had a border problem then, and we were trying to build the wall and do all these other things, and it was bipartisan. We had long discussions and listening sessions and whiteboard exercises in the basements of the Capitol. 9 or 10 months into it, we produced, remember the Goodlatte 1 versus Goodlatte 2 drama? We had two competing bills, and the president said, I kind of like both of them.
This is really a DC drama.
Oh man, I'll write a volume about that one too. But ultimately, both bills failed because we couldn't get everybody together on those issues.
But don't you think there's actually a core philosophical disagreement that can't be squared? Here's what I mean. It's a question of what leads to the most human flourishing for Americans. On the one side of the argument is the perspective that let the free market do its thing. If we let Elon Musk or Meta or whoever, any of these companies, work with whoever is the best and most efficient, economically speaking, talent, that will ultimately lead to the best for everybody. And then there's this other view, this sort of nationalist populist view that is very compelling to a lot of people, which says, no, we have to look out for our own people first, even if it means retraining people and slightly less efficiency for these companies. Like I don't see those as being harmonious. You kind of have to pick one.
Well, they're not harmonious as described, but we are in the process of fusionism. The conservative movement went through a fusionist sort of era, a few decades ago. We're doing it again. And
what was the one then, and what is the one now?
Well, you had like the sort of the John Birch Society, almost libertarian sort of wing, and you had the three legs of the stool of the Reagan era. Remember
Of course.
And bringing all those people together. National Review used to have long series on how we're going to merge all this together. It's a fascinating history of the movement. Matthew Continetti wrote a book recently, The Right.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, and he chronicled a lot of that, but there are others who have. But putting all that together is how we forge the consensus. We have new demographics in the party. We have new folks there. They're bringing all these new perspectives in. And we've got to gear this, again, holding fast to the core principles, not losing, because that's what anchors us. But then also sort of appealing to and hearing from the American worker. The nationalism, it comes from an honest place. They want to take care of their own house first, and I think that is common sense. I think it makes sense, but it doesn't mean that you can turn your back on everything else happening. And how we marry all that together is the question of the day, and I think that the weeks and months ahead are going to be instructive on that.
So no clear answer on Team Musk or Team Bannon.
Oh, I love them both. I have to love everybody.
Oh,
see,
wow,
see
you're
how this
so
works.
okay.
Yes.
California fires are obviously in the news. You made a lot of headlines when you talked about putting conditions on wildfire aid to California. Do you stand by that?
Yeah, you can call it conditions or safeguards or accountability. We owe that to the American taxpayer. We're in dire fiscal straits right now with $36 trillion in federal debt, and they're saying this disaster may be $150 billion or more, right? But why? Why is that? I think if there's culpability, there ought to be conditions. And what do I mean by that? Well, they're natural disasters. I live in a disaster-prone state of Louisiana. Gavin Newsom tried to call me out on social media 48 hours ago, and I hit back and said, go tend to the fires, dude. Get off social media, right? Like, all I was saying is common sense. Again, taxpayers around the country should not be funding crazy leftist policy choices that exacerbated the effects of a natural disaster. We understand there are people in terrible situations there. We got to take care of American people, but when they made decisions to not have the reservoirs filled, to not have hydrants that work, to go to DEI and the fire service and not have capable persons at the helm, to decide that you're going to protect the smelt fish instead of the taxpayer. I mean, it set the conditions to make it much worse. Somebody sent me a video that was produced in 1962, one of those old school documentaries, that chronicled exactly what we just saw happen in 2020, 2025. They had they chronicled this big fire that happened in almost that same area in California because of the Santa Ana winds, and they said these are policy prescriptions that will prevent it from happening again. They defied it.
But if the Red River overflowed and Speaker Hakeem Jeffries said, we're going to put some conditions on that.
If the Red River overflowed because I was down there with dynamite blowing up the levees, then Hakeem would have a great point. That's the effect. That's what we're talking about in California. They almost literally did that, and they set up the conditions for this calamity. So we're going to take care, look, the Congress is going to take care of its obligations. There's a federal role in things like this. But it would be foolish to say that we're going to send blank checks to Gavin Newsom so they can squander it and continue their crazy policies. This is not unprecedented. After Katrina in my state, when we did have floods in the Mississippi and all the rest, there were conditions placed on the money that came. You had to build up higher. If you're at low elevations, you got to put it on stilts, all those things. And everybody thought that was reasonable. After Hurricane Sandy up in the Northeast, same thing. So we're not talking about some new concept here, and it's not a slight to the people of California. It is an admonition to the leadership or the lack of leadership in California, and I think we have an obligation to do that.
January 6, 2021 was obviously a very bad day in American history. Ashley Babbitt killed by a cop, cops were beaten by rioters, the Capitol was trashed, you had the guy in the Camp Auschwitz shirt. You've been asked zillions of questions about this. I don't want to rehash them. People can look to your record. You voted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And
no, I didn't.
Okay. How would you describe it?
How much time do we have?
How much time do we have?
So, look, quick summary. I wrote the famous, infamous brief to the Supreme Court to point out the very obvious fact that in the 2020 election we had unprecedented irregularity and we had unconstitutionality. Why is that? Because it was COVID, sometimes in good faith, sometimes in bad faith. All the different states started adjusting their election laws. You had governors, election commissioners, sometimes state district court judges. They changed all the rules. Hey, let's send paper ballots to everybody. Let's do that. Let's do this. Let's put unmanned ballot boxes in public parks for 6 weeks. All this crazy stuff. Well, here's the problem.
Basically, they changed the rules.
They changed the rules, and it was not constitutional. Why? Because it was not ratified by the state legislatures, which is specifically articulated, very black letter, plain language in the Constitution. Only the state legislatures can choose the manner by which electors are chosen for a presidential election. And when the legislatures did not ratify all these crazy changes, it led to the chaos, it led to the questions, the lack of faith in our institutions, and it violated the Constitution. So we pointed that out plainly. Like, I pointed it out in a brief to the court, very simple. I'm a constitutional law attorney, I used to litigate cases like this. It's one of the shortest briefs I've ever written. It's very clear, legal question. Did they ratify it with the legislatures or not? Here's what the Constitution says, here's what didn't happen. What do we do with that? Supreme Court punted. They said there was no standing, it was the Georgia versus Texas thing. So the question was never answered, but no one can answer that question.
Okay, well, let me put it to you this way. There's sort of two views in parts of the right. There's the kind of hardcore, stolen election view, which has to do with Dominion and China, and we don't even need to get into the fever swamps of it. But then there's the sort of softer view, which is the election wasn't stolen in the sense that like China was controlling the ballots, but it was stolen in the sense that Democrats took advantage of COVID to change the rules.
Of course.
Do you believe that version of things?
I mean, look at Georgia. They sent paper ballots to everybody, and some of these states they sent paper ballots, and there was no way. As soon as it was received back in the mail, once you separated the ballot from the envelope, you couldn't even identify who submitted it. They changed the laws in many jurisdictions in ways that were untraceable. It would be impossible to prove if there was fraud. That's what diminished the people's faith in the election system itself, and that is a great threat to a constitutional republic, right?
We rely on trust and the
Yes.
idea that people trust the outcomes of the elections.
Right.
Let's say you walk out of here and someone comes up to you and says, I don't believe that the 2020 election was fair, and also I don't believe anymore in the outcomes of elections after that. What do you say to that person?
Well, I had to answer that question on the campaign trail over the last year,
I'm
all around
sure.
the country. And
a huge number of people
Yeah.
do not believe we have free and fair elections.
yes, well, this is what I told them, and I meant it in the depths of my soul. It's not a talking point. There was unprecedented irregularity and problem in the 2020 election, but I want to tell you that that's never going to happen again. I said this on the campaign trail because, look, everybody recognized that problem, and in early 2021 and in the months and days after, all the red state legislatures, almost all of them, got deeply involved. Over 400 pieces of legislation were filed or were passed through the legislature, signed into law by the governors to clean up their systems and make sure that all the unprecedented irregularity of 2020 was never repeated again. We have election security measures going on around the country. We passed the SAVE Act in the last Congress to try to make sure that illegal aliens cannot vote in elections. That's also federal law, and there was no mechanism to prove it. We have a lot of improvements that we'll continue to make. The SAVE Act was never signed into law because Chuck Schumer killed it in the Senate. But we're going to keep doing that, and we've got to keep restoring the people's trust, because if we do not have a free and fair election that people trust, that undermines the entire system of our government. I mean, it is the premise of our government in our republic.
January 6th, coup, insurrection, riot, unfortunate day. Like, what's the big TLDR takeaway from that day?
It was a sad day in America. I mean, I was on the floor when it happened, and I honest to God, I did not know what was happening. We heard voices coming down the hall because it echoes around the marble. I was on the floor making the argument about my electoral count, my brilliant constitutional argument. No one heard it because it was so crazy. And I had just yielded the floor to Lauren Boebert, your favorite person.
Yeah.
And she was giving an impassioned plea, and suddenly the Capitol Police come in, they grab the vice president and move him out of the chamber as soon as we heard the noise, and we all thought, my first thought was, it's a terrorist attack. I thought they were terrorists, invading the building. I didn't even know there was a rally or anything. I was so deeply involved in the legal aspect of what we were doing that day. And then everything that happened, volumes have been written about it, and maybe I'll write about it one day as well, but it was just surreal. And I was walking from the chamber to the secret hold place. They ushered us through in the tunnels and all that. And somebody, I can't remember, one of my colleagues was walking and he said, "You do this," and he hands me the phone. I said, "Who is it?" He says, "Fox News Live." I can't do it. He was too shaken. So, hello, it's Bill Hemmer. So I go live, real time. This is still on my Facebook page, January 6th. You can go see it. And it was just the raw emotion of what I was feeling at the time, and how just in my soul it was so disturbing, because to have this in the chamber during that thing when we actually had real legal arguments, what it meant to the country and the whole thing, it was just a really sad day. And I just said, like, we're better than this. Our people are better than this. Our nation is better than this. I don't know. That was my view hasn't changed from that day. It's we did it better January 6th this time. That's the way it should be done. The peaceful transfer of power is an important part of our republic, and that's something conservatives and everybody should support, and we do. So.
There's many questions I want to ask you on social issues. You're really passionate pro-lifer. You have views about gay marriage. We don't have time for all of that today. I did want to ask you just one question, though, and that's about the birth rate.
Yeah.
Birth rate's a huge issue.
Absolutely.
Social conservatives want to see more kids in the world.
Yay.
Right?
Yes.
IVF, where do you stand on that?
I'm pro-IVF, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of friends and family who have beautiful families because of that, and they had trouble conceiving, and I regard that as a great blessing. Now, here's the thing. It can't be unrestricted.
Why did so many people block the IVF bill, colleagues of yours in the Senate a few months ago?
Because they have the same concern that I do. If you have it in a state that has no restrictions, then you wind up with frozen embryos that are stored in freezers. And if you believe, that, as I do, that life begins at conception, that's a serious problem. Those are, that's life. And what do you do with that? Do you just dispose it like, yesterday's trash? I mean, that's a real heavy moral, ethical dilemma. And some of the states haven't wrestled with it at all. They just allow this unrestricted. So in my state in Louisiana, I think has struck the balance right. That there's a limited number that you can have, and there are limitations on all that. I think you got to be very careful about it, But I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater, no pun intended. You don't just get rid of IVF, because it's been a great blessing to a lot of people. And I think it's an innovation in medicine that's been very helpful.
Okay, quick lightning round, and then I'm going to let you schmooze with everyone here.
Okay, great.
You ready?
Yeah.
Should America buy Greenland?
For the right price. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I understand I understand strategically it could be a great thing for us, but I'm not sure we have the money to do that right now. That's my concern.
If Greenland joins the U.S., should it have some kind of representation in the House?
House, but not Senate. No, I'm just kidding. I'm very concerned, really. This is a real thing. I don't want to have 2 more Democrat senators joining the chamber. I mean, really. So call me a protectionist in that regard.
Your job is to be the primary fundraiser for your party. What's the worst part about asking people for money?
Well, I've gotten better at it. The most money I'd ever raised in a cycle, I think, is like $1.2 million before I became Speaker. Last year, by some miracle of God, I raised $332 million. Wow. And I didn't think that was possible, but people were very motivated, and I had to leave it all on the field. But I genuinely enjoyed meeting what some people call the donor class. Some of the greatest Americans are those of means who are self-made, who come from humble beginnings, and they care so much about the country, and they'll open the checkbook and write large amounts because they care about the principle and living in the greatest country. It was so rewarding.
Why are Democrats better at raising money than Republicans, or at least have been in recent years?
Well, because they'll cheat. And no, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. No, really, this is a serious thing. Act Blue, I believe, is a money laundering organization. I really do. And there's some evidence now that's being developed. I think there'll be some investigations, probably litigation, maybe prosecutions. But there are examples that have been proven that there were some large checks, probably taken from overseas. I don't know. That's the conjecture. And then they broke it down into smaller denominations and sent it through their system by using, false identification. They grabbed names of. This is allegedly, okay, but I think it could be proven that they took names of people off voter rolls in various states and said they're Act Blue donors when they had no idea. They started a website called checkmydonation.org, and people were running it through, and it has been informed. I've been informed. They have thousands upon thousands of people who are supposedly donors that never had any knowledge of it. That's a serious problem. So we'll see how the investigations come out, but I mean, that's a big allegation, and if it is proven, that would be a sea change in the election cycle, because Act Blue is truly, I mean, they raise billions and billions of dollars.
Should there be a Twitter files equivalent for the federal government, for the NIH, for example?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think transparency is very important, and government's too big and it hides too much.
You have two nicknames on Capitol Hill,
Oh,
MAGA
dear.
MAGA Mike and Magic Mike. Which one do you prefer?
Geez, I don't know all of it. I'm called much worse, so I'll take both of those. Depends on who you ask.
The conservative activist David Barton, a longtime friend of yours, once summed you up this way: he'll make you smile before he hits you in the mouth so that you won't bloody your lips when he breaks your teeth.
Wow.
Accurate?
Well, I like that. No, look, Ronald Reagan was described this way. They said
Oh my God.
I think it was Jim
Pivot
Baker.
to Reagan.
No,
Get
no,
out, get yourself out.
because he's the model for me. He was described. They said he's like a silky soft pillow with a iron bar in the
Is that
middle.
you?
I mean, I'd like to try to do that. I mean, he was unshakable, but he was a happy warrior because he genuinely loved everybody. And Mike Huckabee said something one time. He was running for governor of Arkansas many years ago, and he said, "You know what? I'm a conservative, but I'm not mad at anybody about it. Like that's kind of my ethos.
What's the most urgent domestic problem? One thing, one word. Most urgent.
Well, the open border. I mean, it was reflected in the election. Everybody knows that.
Most urgent international problem.
This conflict in Israel, I think. We got to resolve it the right way.
Who's your favorite Democrat in the House?
I got a lot of Democrat friends in the House. I mean, well, I spend the most time with Hakeem Jeffries right now. And you know what? We have a great relationship of trust, and we're trying to change the atmosphere. Instead of the two leaders of the parties killing each other every day, we're trying to model civility again.
The Democrats are in the wilderness. Someone's going to come and be the new standard bearer. Is that going to come from someone already in Washington or someone from the outside?
It's a great question. I don't think they can answer it themselves. They're looking for a leader, and we'll see how it evolves. They got a short bench,
Richard Nixon once famously prayed on his knees in the White House in the Lincoln bedroom with Henry Kissinger. Have you ever prayed with Donald Trump?
Yes, yeah. And I've talked to him a lot about the hand of providence and how I'm convinced that God spared his life twice on the world stage, 2 assassination attempts within 65 days or whatever it was. And right after the second assassination attempt, this is interesting, a footnote in history, but I arrived at Mar-a-Lago right after that event. We were scheduled to meet, and everything was shut down. My motorcade came in at the same time his did, and we sat, my wife and I and he and Susie Wiles, chief of staff, sat there for 2 hours and 45 minutes in a hold room. He's still in his golf attire, and he's processing the fact that he almost had a second assassination attempt in that amount of time. And it occurred to him, and it would shake any man. He's one of the strongest people I've ever known. But he was very contemplative in that moment. And I talked to him again that day about providence, and like, this is not an accident. I don't believe in coincidence, sir. I think, this is a phenomenal thing. And I believe God's going to raise you up. The Bible's very clear. God raises up those in authority. I get accused for criticized for saying this all the time, but I mean, it's my worldview. But I don't believe there are accidents in this arena, and I think he's been raised up for this time. And that's a profound thing for anybody to contemplate. I think he does that. He's been talking about it. He talks about providence. He talks about how he believes in God more than ever. And I think anybody would be in his situation. But it's an interesting thing and an interesting times we live in.
Favorite biblical phrase?
Bless those who persecute you. That's the one I'm practicing the most these days.
What's the last book you read?
I reread The Firm about a year and a half ago. I have no time for leisure reading at all, but it was one of my favorites when I was early in my career. And I was just doing it for leisure, and it took me like 6 months to get through it because I don't have any time.
Do you watch television?
It's always on the news, sadly.
Any movies you've seen recently?
Yeah. I haven't been to a theater in a long time.
What'd you watch? What was the last thing you watched?
My wife and I we had a little Netflix night. What would we even see? I don't know. We watched like the war genre. Oh, I saw what is it? Darkest Hour about
Churchill.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film. Yeah.
That's my movie watch. I've seen it like literally 30 times.
I love it. Yeah.
McDonald's order?
Quarter pound with cheese, no onions.
No onions?
Yeah.
Do you avoid seed oils?
Don't even really regard seed oils. I don't know.
Do you identify as Maha?
Yeah. Now we're going to define what that means, but yes.
What do you think of Bobby Kennedy?
I like him. I didn't know what to think, but after hanging out ringside at UFC fight, I got to like the guy a whole lot.
What were those things flying over New Jersey?
I can't tell you. No, it's not. I don't. Look, the explanation, it may actually make sense. Mayorkas said it, and I don't believe anything he says, but he might be right on this one. He said the regulations changed, and you can now fly drones at night, and people are just now seeing what was always there, but we didn't allow them to fly at night. I'm not buying that part, but I don't think it's China or an international threat. I just think it's probably largely hobbyist enthusiasts and stuff, but I'm still trying to get a real briefing on that, and we might not know until Trump comes in and we have new authorities.
Are UFOs real?
Am I what?
Are UFOs real?
Oh, no, they're not.
Who killed JFK?
I'm still trying to find out.
Are we going to find out in this administration?
Maybe. He said he's going to. I mean, it's time, right? It's been time. We should know.
Speaker Johnson, thank you so much for coming on Honestly.
Thanks so much.
Really
Great pleasure.
appreciate it.
You got it. Sure.
Really fun.
Sure.